Hey, Hireheads! On this episode, we discussed the Title IX revisions and wanted to ensure you that we did not leave out the impacts to collegiate sports. Stay tuned for a special release titled The Playbook, coming to you soon. Gratitude and stay well, everyone.
Hey, this is Fernando.
And I'm Hannah.
And this is Shaq.
And Jordan. And you're tuned into the Higher Head podcast. Now let's start the show.
Please have a seat, everybody. It is good to be home.
Grand Rising Hirehead Nation, I hope you're all doing well thus far this week and taking care of yourselves the best that you can. This week, I just wanted to shout out our activists and those that are on the front line, fighting for justice and equality for all each and every day. Your efforts aren't going unnoticed, and thank you for help contributing to change in the world as we know it.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Hirehead Nation, how y'all doing? Today, we come to you live and in charge about education and politics. We're not going to be talking about educational policy per se, but more so how the government is influencing education right now heavily and what those changes look like for everyone and what campuses are going to look like with elections coming up and those sorts of things. So a lot of nitty gritty, but some great conversation hoping to have your way.
And before we get into the thick of things, let's talk about what that means, right? We're looking at institutions who are kind of being carrot held or spoon fed to open with kind of these financial incentives. And you can witness or you can observe administrations not know how to operate through these regulations and these requirements to reopen so quickly without having the consideration of safety and distancing and all those other aspects that we now have to consider. It really is a game of what's going on and how do we provide the best service? How do we get the funding to still operate? But how do we make sure that our students are safe? And we have to make sure that that's a top priority for us as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that opening means in-person classes, not just opening and having classes online, but actually being
butts in seats,
yeah.
booties in chairs, yes.
Heads in heads.
And this is mainly happening through the HEROES Act, right? If I'm correct, that's a Health and Economic Recovery Omnibus Emergency Solution.
Yes, all those names for one plan, yes.
Hero.
And I think that's where the debate is right now, right? And that's kind of what Jordan was talking about, all the different attachments that are being requested, on behalf of the institutions in order to receive this form of funding.
And so at this current stage, they make it very apparent to say through all of these acts and these plans to refinance or provide funding to these institutions to open, none of these numbers are fixed, right? So they can get all the way down to having schools reopen, but can still operate without having a confirmed amount of dollars to delineate to these institutions. So it's really about what is happening in Congress while schools are trying to figure out what's going to happen on this proposed opening day.
Yeah. I think that's funny to think about when you think about how we talked about in previous episode. They gave $40 billion and they allocated it. Most of that money had to go to students with need, and then they used the rest of the money however they wanted to as an institution. Mm-hmm. And now they are possibly going to get more money, but they need to open up first and have to use whatever money they may have to figure that out. And that includes like figuring out janitorial services, the cleaning services, providing sanitizer and cleaning things for students. So, some schools are like looking at their air ducts, and like all of that stuff is costing them money just in order to get money from the federal government.
Ain't that how it works anyway?
I'm a little confused.
Anyway, I think the reason we call this episode was Education and Politickin, yes, KIN, Politickin, is because it's really a game. You go into college to get your degree, to advance your life, make a difference, but at the end of the day, the institution as a whole, as an entity, has a big challenge of playing politics with policy and money, right? So in our neck of the woods, which is student affairs, on a lot, as an institution, they play in politics with the government.
So I have a question for y'all.
Uh-huh.
How are you feeling about schools even allowing students to come back right now in this current climate? And like I sent y'all that article earlier today about that Indiana school where a couple hours into them opening, they had to shut down because a student tested positive. And that was a K through 12 school at that. So like, imagine an institution of 50,000 people.
They say, welcome back. Oh, wait, no, hold up. Go back. Go back.
Like, what communication disaster is that going to look like? What testing are they going to, like, how is the school going to be the ones that have to provide that? Boom, more money that they got to spend to figure that out. Like, how are y'all feeling about where all of this is headed for us and students headed back to campus? Hey, hands.
That's all I can say.
I think it's chaotic because I don't think that every university has the same amount of resources to be able to provide that form of protection for students. And then secondly, the guidelines. How do you create policy to put in place to protect your students from it? Whether it's going to be like, what do you do? Like, if students don't wear their masks, do you kick them out? Do you sanction them? Do you, how do you go about inflicting some form of punishment for keeping everybody in place for the greater good?
Oof. I know that right now where I'm at, there's definitely sanctions that are happening for students if they're caught not socially distancing or wearing their masks. But it's also where I'm at. They're very mission driven, and part of their mission is community and taking care of the community. And so it's going to be really interesting to tell first year students, like, you're welcome to this community that you can't technically be a part of, but you're a part of. So take care of it.
Right. As much as I'm ready to go back, right? And there's an experience that happens when you're on campus.
Absolutely.
You can't deny that. Whether you're on a campus that provides a good experience,
It's an experience nonetheless.
They vary and experience deliverance, right? And so either way, I was excited to get back. I'm still excited to go back, but I would be lying, and I think I've said this before. I kind of caught a deja vu case right there, but I would be lying if I said it was bad timing. Like, we still don't have a vaccine or a shot, a tablet, a combination of prescriptions to give people to say, see me in a week. It's not like what the flu grew to become when it comes to vaccination and prevention and remedy. So it's chaotic. I think if we are out too long, we may go back and we may not know how to operate, or we may have to operate on a lesser scale due to the fact that we probably lost some money in that time. Because let's remember, as much as developmental and growth and education that takes place, there is still some revenue being generated. And when those doors are closed, that revenue is not generated. Unless you are a school who is charging the same tuition as you did before, then you not take no hit. But
plenty of them
in
are.
this case, right, we're not gonna shout out who it is, but you could probably find out who it is on your own. Let us know. It's really a toss up. Who has the right answer, really?
I mean, my thing is like, yeah, I feel like it's very interesting to me because I think what I'm experiencing now is it's kind of this, it's like a second wave of how we all felt when the schools did close down. Of this, just going back to the first episode, the uncertainty of everything, understanding that like it's kind of like there's I don't want to say agenda, but there's other people in power that are trying to push us to do something when it's really not safe to do so.
Right.
And there's so many things that are there's so many cards that are being played at the same time. My thing is like if we're going to talk about initiatives, whatever, to get money out to schools, like that funding should go to like not only the funding the jobs and stuff, but I think it should go into preparing students like to be virtual at home. I think about the disproportionality of students really thinking about like elementary to high school students and stuff like that aren't able to go back to school, but they don't have access to computers or internet, or they don't have the space in their house. Some may or may not have the space in the house to like get that instruction that they need. And I feel like it needs to be more of a push of like, damn, we're going virtual, good luck, rather than like, like I feel like there needs to be more preparation on that front. I know a few institutions this week reversed their decisions, at least out here in California, reversed their decisions and decided to go virtual.
Right.
For one of the institutions, they start this month, and they just decided last week, you know what, we're going to go virtual. What about all the students that just moved out here? I really feel for the graduate students. Really, it's just like some of them are moving across the country. They're starting these assistantships. They went through the process and made a decision to still come out here just to be virtual. And it's not their fault. It's the inevitable and all this stuff. And
Right.
hopefully they're still able to be employed in things like that. And school is the least, I'm not saying school is the least of the worries, but like they're able to adapt. Hopefully they have all the resources. But I think about our international students. Okay, some of those that can't come back or that are deciding to stay home, what about the time difference? Like how, where is the equity in all of this is what I think about. And it's just very interesting. I'm sitting here looking out the window at life just passing me by, and I'm in disbelief. Like it's just, I really am, but it's just like, it's kind of unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. And it's chaotic is the word, because it's just like I think why it's so chaotic and why we're looking for answers is because we've never, something on this scale has never been done. So I think it's just, there's a lot of damage control going on, but yeah.
I also think it's important to think about like the institution holistically and all of the things that they're juggling beyond just COVID, right? Like, if we're talking about education and the politics, like there's a lot of stuff that the federal educational department is putting on schools to still follow through with, even during these times of like complete chaos and uncertainty, which actually I think is important. Like the Title IX changes that are coming up in about a week or so. I think those are very important changes, but also like schools can possibly get a break if they don't open up and like being able to implement those the way that they should be. Or if they are opening up, they have to know like that they got these Title IX things under control, especially for like people being stuck in their residence halls. What do we think that there's going to be a rise in these kind of cases or situations happening because of this, or is it going to happen less because of COVID? Like, I think that there's a lot of those other things that institutions are juggling.
Have you ever sat through a Title IX training before?
Yes.
Baby.
I have.
You know how long those things are? And so you want these people to open? You want these people to open schools, worry about Corona for the duration of the semester, let's just be honest, and you want them to learn the new changes and then because you're going to have to, one of the duties of our institutions are to educate and train its staff, right? And so you want them to then go create PowerPoints because you're not going to have them created for them. and give the presentations. They already a 2 hour meeting, which is important because everybody should know about their Title IX regulations. But it's a lot right now. We may get a chance to catch up as institutions, but it won't be a moment of rest if we don't open. I do believe that.
You know, I do think there's a lot to say regarding these changes to the Title IX procedures because this is something that has been happening.
Yes.
You know, these changes have been
Last year.
occurring since 2016, 2017. Yeah. You know, but these changes first happened with complete amendment to the Dear Colleague letter. And now with the OCR creating these new regulations, what exactly does it mean for student affairs professionals working, you know, in housing or, you know, or kind of, you know, handling these procedures, right?
Fernando.
Because the changes.
Can you tell the people what OCR is?
The Office of Civil Rights. The Office of Civil Rights is an office that handles the policy changes regarding Title IX. Right. So the changes that currently happen to Title IX have to do a lot with proceedings, because while there's two sides to this, one side is the student affairs aspect, the student affairs professionals aspect, and the other side is the legal intricacies that we see in the Title IX procedure. Because as a professional, if you're handling a situation like this, you're going to be, you know, you want what's best for the person who's being accused and the person who is the victim in the situation, and trying to find the best possible outcome. But with the new proceedings, we're bringing a lot of what we see in the criminal justice system into the field of higher education. Now we have cross-examinations. Now we have legal representatives. We have lawyers involved in this process. And there's two sides to it, right? While one side focuses on individual rights and the protection of individual rights, and that is the aspect as of we're trying to protect the student who's being accused and trying to protect their individual rights. But the other side of it is, what about the person who's been the victim in this situation? Right. How does a person who's going through such a traumatic situation, now they have to confront the proceedings of cross-examinations, of having to confront the person that's being, you know, the person that they have accused of such actions. And it's just, there's just so much legal intricacies going into the process. And I wonder if the health and the mental health of the students is being put in the center of all of this. Because with with so much, you know, legalities involved in the system, you know, the student affairs professionals are left out of this process of actually, you know, using their skills.
There's actually a part of the amendments that talk about supportive measures, and within that, it's like making sure that if a survivor or a victim does come forward, that they have access to all of the resources that are on campus that can provide them with those, I guess, like restorative measures for them, so that they can feel like that they still have access to their education. And then, on the other hand, if there is a formal complaint, they actually do talk about supportive measures for both parties: the person who has been accused, and then the person who has brought the complaint forward. And so I think a lot of the changes more so have talked about the person being accused and making sure that they feel like they still have access to a proper education as well. Just because of, I guess that I'm not sure what the rate of false accusations on college campuses are. I'm not even sure that colleges understand that, because they were the ones doing this due process that was happening. But they are trying to have restorative practices for both parties, which I think that is very important. I think that is something that's super important. But if you have all these restorative practices as the proceeding is happening, but then all of a sudden the survivor has to come in front of the accused and be questioned about the night and what happened, and the person is sitting in that room, how traumatic is that? Like, all that restorativeness has gone out the window, and you got to start back at zero. So it's really just contradicting.
And so something that they used to ask us in our program, and it's funny that we're having this conversation today. Do you think student affairs professionals are or should be tasked with being key administrators in a Title IX proceeding or in the Title IX process?
Well, I do believe that yes, and also there should be much more training involved, because kind of going back to what Shaq talked about, the idea of due process and restorative justice practices, they almost don't go hand in hand, because we're trying to, when we talk about due process, we talk about, implementing a procedure that is just, and that we protect the rights of the individuals, while restorative practices are focused on trying to move on and trying to restore, what happened. And I just think it's they're two different, they're areas that conflict and it's in themselves. And I think that, going back to what you said, I think that student affairs professionals need a little more legal training if this is going to be the new way we're going to implement these.
I think it's interesting too, because I know that I feel like I'm kind of on the fence about it too, because the roles that student affairs professionals play in having to be like a mandated reporter or a confidential reporter or resource and stuff like that. And I think about, I guess at least my experience with Title IX issues and stuff like that, how, yeah, you have your advocates and stuff, people to connect the victim or assault, like the person that was assaulted to kind of help out with that. But just how the students or the people that are involved have to go through several lines of people in order to get, I guess, before the processes start. Right. There's so many people involved. So I'm thinking in terms of like, I feel like it's essential, because let's say, a student comes to me and tells me this, I connect them, but they only feel comfortable with me being there with them through that process. If I had the proper training, along with capacity and time, I think it's important. So I feel like there does need to be, I feel like student affairs professionals do belong there. But also, I'm not saying everyone can't be there, but it's just like there should be some type of training, if it even is a little bit more in depth, beyond the 2 hours, I'm guessing, to kind of equip folks. But it's Title IX is one of those things, I feel like for me, that there's so many things that go on. There's so many different processes. There's so many different situations. I feel like most situations can be very unique. And also, like, what with these Title IX changes, are students really going to feel comfortable reporting? And obviously that's at their discretion. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it myself. So I think about that too. But I feel like it's very important to keep the students' well-being in mind, and not to cape for the person that caused the assault. I know with restorative justice practices, in my experience, it's about how to integrate that student back into the campus community as well. Because they're still a student, they still go to school there. It's not to justify their actions at all, but it's just like, how can we make sure that these people still feel a part of the community as well? But I think that also goes with policy too, because what are the repercussions for someone who's committing actions like that?
And you know what, Hannah? I think that's why there's a due process, is because, like, I think I don't even know how to say this. I think it's hard to sit here and even talk about a scenario in which this happens. But if a person is falsely accused, it just so happened that the student body got a wind of the accusation, they then have to clear their name and try and figure out how to get back on campus properly too. but then
Right.
they may not trust anyone at that point because everybody has turned on them. So where like we as student affairs professionals are trained or should be trained in restorative practices, but that's different for every campus.
Right.
As if they're using
Right.
that. But like I think it's going to be extremely hard for institutions to wrap their head around going through a full thorough process, talking to these students' friends and getting character development and getting a full picture of what it's like for this and diving deep and then being like, okay, this happened or this didn't happen. Either way, somebody's hurt in that proceeding. Yeah, and
Process,
so
yeah.
I think the biggest question is like, where are institutions or how are institutions ready to grapple with both? And it's not something that they haven't been able to do before, right? It's these things have been happening before. But I think it gets deeper because of how many people are even more involved now. And for clarification, there for people, for student affairs professionals who are going to be involved in like being advisors is what they call them for Title IX cases. They will have a separate training. They have to go through a training and to get a certificate to be a part of that process. So even if a student comes to you and you didn't go through that training, you can't be there with that student during that whole process. They have to have someone who's trained in that. So that's another caveat that's happening, that some students were comfortable with coming to a certain person and understanding that person were going to be there with them through that process. But if that person's not completely trained, they have to hand that student off to someone else. And that could be the end of even a complaint for a student because they don't trust that other person.
And so you spoke about something, knowing the resources and having the resources available to these students when they need in these moments of crises. What happens, because we know every institution, whether it's community, private, public, denominational, you name it, resources look different at every institution, and oftentimes it's due to lack of professionals in that role or lack of funding to bring on full-time professionals. Is there equity in the Title IX response when we talk about resources and personnel and how can we provide the best support to our students? Do you think that every institution is on the same baseline level of response when it comes to Title IX incidents?
No.
I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say no
Don't gang up on
because
me like that, y'all.
I had an experience. I working at a small school, and I mean, I saw one person was, receiving the complaints. One person was the investigator. One person was in charge of the whole process. So sometimes I think as smaller schools that have less resources have less ability to hire different people that will take on different roles of the process, because that's going to be crucial. I think we're gonna see we need more. We need to see more investigators in Title IX in the Title IX office. We need to see people who are going to be the advisors to focus on that specific role. People who are going to be on the panel for implementing restorative practices to just focus on that. Because if we see any form of overlapping in the process, I think it just harms the whole proceeding. And I don't think that all universities are equipped for that.
A word that we've kind of adopted on the low is this idea of triage in student affairs, where we come together, whether you're in a different office, whatever the case may be, and provide the best support collaboratively. And I think, Fernando, you were the person who brought up collaborative work, maybe last episode, but I think this may be an opportunity to look at what offices can be built together to create this triage approach to handling Title IX cases, whether it's from addressing false reports or uplifting the reports and moving them to the correct proper channels, because I don't want to delineate from which is important, because they're both equally important. But it's a time for us to open the gates of who sits down with these processes and provides the best support to these students without furloughing it to one central office or one central person like you spoke about.
we had advocates that would be on call to kind of handle these situations and send the information up. So I feel like it is important to be a collaborative effort, but maybe it will be one of those things where we have a triage of folks that are a
Right.
task force that specifically handles these things outside of their additional responsibilities. And I think that's what's important. And I think that's what's very unique and wonderful about student affairs is like this ability to, if your main job is to support students, it can be in all aspects and you have opportunities to do that outside of your one position. So I agree with the triage. I like that word, triage.
I was gonna say, like, I think that, like, I agree with what y'all saying, but I think that it's hard to do because when you're wearing so many hats, so many triages are happening at the same time that you may not be able to give your full-fledged effort to all of them. And I think that that's the hard part about being in student affairs is that people wear multiple hats all the time. And so if we're talking about them doing a due process, but you also have to do 4 other conduct cases, how are you finding that balance to give equal energy to both? That's where burnout comes in, and that goes back to our last episode and talking about like being overworked in those things. Like wearing all of these different hats can create so much burnout, and especially I think when you talk about sexual assault, relationship violence, sexual harassment, like those things can happen at any point, every day, all day throughout campuses. And so when we talk about, like involving staff into these processes beyond the Title IX office, which, some of them have 1 people and some of them have 3 or 4, those staff that are wearing all of those hats can easily fumble a situation for a student and that not be a due process for either party. So I think that it's something to think about when, knowing that all departments have their different high seasons and those things, when including people who are already wearing so many different hats.
And I question when they came up or when they created the new regulations, was there an assessment taken of what students who have gone through these processes or who have been victims or went through their Title IX office? Do we have adequate assessment that lets us know what it is that students need during these times, during these experiences that they undergo? Do we know if we have to up the mental health services? Do we know if they want to talk to one professional or they prefer to be, have we asked the question to those students to give us the best information to make these changes?
You know what? Let's call Congress.
It.
If somebody got their number, we could hit them.
Oh, I'm good.
They did that.
I'm good. My number's always been dialed out there. Like they can't call me. I can't call it. It's a reception problem.
I mean, they're the one who did this, so I don't know what they looked into, and I'm not even sure if students who have gone through these processes will even be willing to come forward and talk about what that looked like for them. And I'm not going to say that that's like for everybody, because I'm pretty sure some people will and talk about, like, be willing to talk about their experience. But at the same time, I think when you look at the regulations, not too much has changed beyond kind of like we talked about the process and procedures that are happening. There being a advisor for both parties, the cross-examination, making sure we have restorative practices for both parties involved. I think that those are some of the larger pieces that have changed from what I read and processed. And I'm not no expert on this, so any Title IX expert can come at me with this one. But I don't think that there's been that many large changes. But it's large enough changes to have schools scrambling in a high stress time of COVID and just other political things that are going to happen on campus this semester.
With students being in a moment of such amplified voice, right? We're finally getting to a place where we're talking about what's happening on at our institutions. We have social media accounts. We have students really telling their story of their experiences, whether it's at a PWI or their own institution that's outside of that realm. What what does the politically charged campus look like?
I don't even know if it's after August. I think as soon as we open up, like
whenever that is. Let's be very
right, absolutely. So as soon as schools open up, like how are they having these conversations from beyond just being like emails sent to students like we're on your side and like we understand all these things that you're going through and we're here with you.
In
and
this
we're going to
together.
be there with you. Yes, and we're going to get through this together. So I think one, if schools are in person, how are they going to continue to show that? And two, if schools aren't, how are schools going to make their faculty have conversation around what's going on in the world and like implementing that into their curriculum, or if our faculty gonna even be open to that? Because we know faculty when it comes to their little tenure positions.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Listen, they have the freedom to create the learning environment in which they think is best conducive to their course.
But is it conducive to the times in which we are in?
I ain't touched that one. I ain't touched that.
And that's my question.
No. Yeah. I think about it, well, piggybacking off what Shaq said, times, and is it accessible to students in the way that they need? But that's learning, the way students learn is not the question. So that's a whole nother episode, I'm sure. I think I want to disagree with the return to campus because it's already happening.
Right.
These students, faculty, staff, alumni. I'm an alumni, being an alumni of the institutions that I attended. Things are happening on social media. And statements that are being sent out aren't necessarily good enough. You know, like people, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you're going to put these words up, but like, you're not like, can you back up or show the receipts for what you're saying? Or what group of marginalized individuals did you leave out? Or what words didn't you use? Or how are you going to show that action in this 11th third? So students are really dissecting what's being said. Students are really showing up for each other and being allies. Some are being combative. Like there's a lot of clashes going on and stuff like that too. So I feel like it's very interesting to see how this all unfolds when we're at home. You know, well, some of us are at home. Some students are returning to campus. Some aren't. Who knows what's going on? But I feel like I think this is a segue into real change being implemented at institutions, especially PW, in terms of students' voices being amplified, and students really taking the reins and shouting and making sure changes instilled. I feel like universities are hopefully going to start really listening and really showing up for the people that they're serving.
So I like the entire time I was sitting here, I was listening, and I'm like, okay, you know, we're talking about the liberals, quote unquote, right? And how they are wanting what they're wanting. But what do you think institutions are going to do about conservative students understanding that freedom of speech is a thing, minus freedom of hate speech, because we ain't condoning none of that. But there are still conservative students, you know, be it 18 to 30 something, 40 something, 60 something. There are still conservative students that exist on campus who might not agree with the changes that are happening. So how do you think institutions are going to grapple with that?
I think the same way they have previously. I attended an institution that brought the family member or an associated family member of a certain political figure onto a public institution. You couldn't really tell nobody that it wasn't going to happen because the person was coming. They were going to speak regardless. They weren't going to say, oh, we're so sorry, we're not going to allow this to happen. because one big part of it is because it was a public institution and really turned visitors away due to beliefs, politics, whatever the case may be. Right. So I think the best thing institutions will try to do is develop policy, because we always try to go on some written documentation here, really highlighting their freedom of speech and what that looks like on their institution during this time. I think it's safe to say that there is a professional in some department that works in some facet of student life or student development or campus culture, whatever you want to title it today, that has said when students get back, we have a lot of work that we will need to do prior and while they are here. I don't think it's going to be an issue of if you lean left or right, we're going to silence to the left and amplify. None of that. I think it's still going to be the same open field that it's always been when it comes to political beliefs. But I feel like there will be more intention, or there's a heightened intentionality when it comes to creating environments where students are those dialogues and promote their beliefs of whatever it may be, orange over blue or yellow over purple. I think they will still be encouraged to do that because at the forefront, we continue to regard higher education as this arena of free thinking and growth. And you can grow while you still insult someone, right? Like that's going to be that I don't think that's something that's going to change, at least in my own reflective bubble, if we call it that.
Jordan, I do agree with you.
I appreciate that perspective.
I do as well. I think universities should, at least they should be a neutral place to talk about social issues. I don't believe that universities are a place to, force one political views on another. I think that institutions should be held accountable to create the space to talk about history, to deconstruct social problems, to talk about race. But I think that they have to go on very careful in how they create the spaces to have these conversations. Because I think it's dangerous. I mean, just from my perspective, I think it's dangerous to have, political parties on campus sometimes that just incite, because political parties are platforms that they follow certain ideology. They don't necessarily reflect the issues of the community. And I think that's sometimes what people need to understand when they talk about political parties, that political parties were created with a platform. And they don't represent everybody's views. I can be someone who's a conservative in certain ideology, and then be more of a liberal in another ideology. That doesn't necessarily. I don't necessarily identify with one political party or the other. I think political parties, these ideologies, these platforms have become almost toxic in how we talk about social campus. So I think that institutions need to be careful in how they create these spaces, and being careful to not lean one way or the other, because both sides have a lot of issues.
And so I think that that's more so what I was thinking about, and I appreciate everything that you all just mentioned. But like the toxicity of having a liberal versus conservative, and being like, well, this is the College of Republicans, the College of Democrats. It doesn't allow for a freedom of hearing out and understanding everyone's issues, because there's already a built-in ideology about someone who identifies as Republican or identifies as Democrat, or liberal or independent and whatnot. And so I think that that's where I think institutions are going to have to figure out, like, you can't say we can't have political conversations, right? But more so, it's an ideology at the end of the day. It's beyond political conversations. Like, those are ideologies that people have, thoughts and ideas that they have, that they believe are true. And for whatever reason, be it they got it from their political platform or they were taught this, they have this idea. And so I think that institutions have to, they have to grapple with having these organizations on campus, having people not view them. I think that there's going to be more conversations about how are we making sure we hear everyone and not trying to silence someone.
And so my question to you on that same note is that I think the idea of having these two student organizations is reflective of the world as a whole, right? So students go into college and they come in with these notions, these ideas, these beliefs based off platforms, whether they got it from their mama, their daddy, their significant others, their adopted family, their relatives, whoever they get these notions or the world that they've lived in thus far. Once you matriculate out of college, that is what society is like. So I like to think that institutions and their community, their campus communities rather, are many representations of our society as a whole. It really, you look at international students, they come and they really, I love talking to international students, whether it's on the graduate level, undergrad, because they give you perspective about cultures or ways of thinking about life that we don't get here in the US, right? And so I agree that institutions have to be very, very careful when they talk about, this is a safe zone and you can speak freely here and this is how we want, you can't really structure or put your hand on free speech. We already know that.
Right.
And if you don't, the Higher Head podcast taught you. But knowing that a lot of institutions can't really dabble into regulating free speech of their students, I really think that their hands are tied with this one a lot of the times. And that's just in case by case, because some are just, outright wrong. But in most cases, what can they do? How can we create these environments without infringing on rights?
Go ahead, Fernando.
Go ahead, Shaq.
Oh,
I think something that you brought up is the idea of how it reflects the real world. I mean, we have two political parties.
Right.
We have two political parties right now, literally fighting over whose idea is stronger to pass an economic bill while people are dying.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be one way or the other. It doesn't. It literally, it has to be about exactly. You said it has to be about people. Let's put people at the center of the issue instead of trying to lean one way or the other. I think in the national aspect of things and national politics, sometimes issues have nothing to do with one political party or the other. And political parties have managed to, represent, the people in America and how they think and how they make decisions. Let's start to focus on the real issue. Let's go to local politics, state politics, like things that go on our city council, things that go on our state legislature. They have nothing to do sometimes with one political party or the other. Sometimes political parties and these platforms keep us from looking at the real issue, from trying to address the real problems. So I think we need to see how they have managed to, to affect how we make decisions, at the national level, and see how they've managed to centralize their platforms to affect people even at the local level and at our universities and even the way we think and make decisions,
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to speak on. I was like, while I agree that our institutions should be a reflection of society, like the way that society is being run right now shouldn't be the way. Like it doesn't have to be this way. You know what I'm saying? And to say that higher education is supposed to be a place, for me, higher education is a place of knowledge creation and of understanding. To say that those things are to say that institutions is that place is hard when like we only have these two worlds to grapple with. We have this and or to hold on to. And I don't yes, institutions give those people that free space and that freedom of speech and those things, but at the same time cut that tie to political parties and political aspirations and understand that politically correct has never been correct. So
message.
There's no reason to even have political ties when it comes to education and learning and those things.
As it shouldn't be. And so how do we move forward and how do we handle the situation of returning to campus or not, understanding that our campuses will be politically charged, especially with the month of November. With the month of November rapidly approaching, what do we do?
You know, I think, Jordan, I think we focus on the community. Every community is different. Every community has different needs. Every community has different resources. Instead of trying to adapt or all these national platforms, these bigger ideologies, let's focus on our actual student community. Every college needs different things, and I think that as a college community, people need to come in and say, hey, what does our university need? What is the atmosphere in this university? Instead of trying to bring these outside ideologies, and even, I mean, I know that it's inevitable, but maybe focus on the issues that are right in front of the university, not trying to bring these new, bigger, broader problems to campus.
Yeah, I would agree and take it beyond just the campus community. Like every institution is within a community in itself, right? Like I think about where I'm at being in the middle of Chicago, and then also like Howard being right in the middle of DC. And I mean, those communities sometimes aren't taking care of those institutions, but I think like the institution can branch out into certain communities and take care of those communities as well, or even see the injustices that are happening around the community and how that's affecting the college campus, because that definitely affects the campus. And so I think beyond taking it beyond the students, granted, we need to pay attention to the students because they paying to be here, and they here first, but they're also connected to the community and need to be, like, some of them are live in the communities close to the institutions. And so we need to think about the campus community, but also how the outside community is affecting the campus community, which is complete opposite of what Fernando said, I know. But I do think, I really do think that like the the community outside brings in just so much, because that's where those students are coming from. But it goes back to kind of paying attention to local government and their ordinances as well.
And so I don't know if y'all caught that, but Shaq shared that she is currently living in Chicago. If you have not watched The Shy on Showtime, I need you to stop what you're doing. Pause the podcast. Finish this out. That's important. But it is an amazing show. That's The Shy, TheChi, on Showtime. If you don't have a subscription, hit us up. We'll show you how to get one. And Hannah, where do we go from here?
I mean, I've only been at the house, so there's that. But I think, for real, for me though, I think it's really about being flexible and adaptable, because things are changing each and every day. I think about, I mean, it's just kind of rolling with the punches. We're trying to be as prepared as we can. But I think just showing up with your best foot forward and just remembering what your values and your mission is in supporting students as a student affairs professional. I think about intention too, doing everything with intention and creating these spaces. But also, I think it's just kind of creating space for real conversations to happen. And not just for our students, for our faculty, for our staff, for our administrators. And I think there's going to be a real humanistic factor to things from now on. When we return, if we online, whatever's going on. But I think this goes to show that there's going to be, higher education is never going to look the same again.
I'm a big supporter of prepping our students for what they are embarking on. So what can you experience on a modern day college, or people learning how to hack into Zoom calls? So what can you be faced with as a returning student, as a new student, really making sure that we are mentally preparing incoming and existing students for what college life is outside of involvement, activity, service, the things that really matter. The community aspect, working, living, learning in a shared community. How are we aiding in their process of understanding what's going on? I think it's going to be important more than ever to really ensure that we're fostering this idea of taking care of the self to our students and our professional staff, just being mindful that times haven't changed, because this has always been a part of our fabric as a society and as an institution. And when I say institution, I mean higher ed, but it's that much more real now, right? So we've been seeing some scenes from decades ago, right, with with protesting and the way that the government has responded to that. That's something that a lot of us didn't think we would ever have to see again, or have to think about, or it becomes our reality, but it very well did. So I think preparing each and every person who has to return to an office, return to a classroom, return to an SGA meeting, as an example, for what college life can be now. Yeah.
Please have a seat, everybody. It is good to be home.